And welcome back into the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Southeast Termite and Pest Control. And I know the local folks at Southeast Termite and Pest Control very proud to salute the memory of Pat Summitt today. As we start this segment, I thought it was interesting. Gino Auriemma, ironically enough, of all people, I thought he might have done the best job of summing things up in a very short statement by saying right there, lots of people coach the game, very few define it. And I know there aren't a lot of people in Tennessee that are big fans of Gino Auriemma, Chuck, but I don't know that you could say it much better than he said it right there.
Yeah, and very short and sweet. And actually, I think he was one of the first ones to respond. And then, from what I was told, actually made a donation to the Pat Summitt Foundation. So I think a lot more of him for that.
Remarkable how much outpouring there was nationally this week. And, of course, today in overtime, in our overtime segment online, we will have about 8 or 9 different comments from people all over the country that I'm sure you'll want to see. Check that out online today. Guys, you know, I saw someone this week was saying, what is the big deal? Some outsider, what is the big deal? And it might have been Tony Barnhart, some national writer that has a southern taste that knows how important things are here, said, she is to Tennessee as Bear Bryant is to Alabama. And I thought, yes, more than a coach, more than a legend, mythic at a certain point. And we talked in the last segment about the way she handled people and dealt with people. You have a great story, Mickey. It's not necessarily a funny story. It's just a tremendous story about Pat Summitt.
Well, she always had time for people. And we were on a charter flight back from a road game, and the flight attendant all of a sudden just started sobbing uncontrollably. And Pat goes up to console her, wanted to know what the problem was. And the flight attendant told this story that previously she was in a wheelchair after an auto accident. And Pat, coming off the floor at Louisiana Tech, took time to not only stop and acknowledge or talk to her, she got down on her knees and talked to her and told her that she could do anything she wanted to do if she worked hard at it and put her mind to it, and that included walking. And then that girl, with no contact with Pat between the two, ended up being her flight attendant on a charter flight. And that just, to me, I tell that story to a lot of people because it shows how she took time for just everyday people.
Years ago when I was doing the Pat Summitt show, she asked me to help with they had some pregame tapes they would watch before ball games, thus pregame, and did the fire 'em up tapes for them. They win the national championship that year. It's the year they beat UConn in the Final Four, beat Virginia in the finals. I get a handwritten note, and I got handwritten notes from her on everything. But here's a handwritten note from Pat Summitt that simply said, John, thanks for your contribution in us winning the national championship this year. Guys, my contribution was less than the guy who turned the lights on and off in the gym. But it shows that I bet she not only sent me that note, she probably sent a note to the guy who turned the lights on and off in the gym. She did take the time to recognize every single person, no matter what they did with her, which is very, again, unique. Keep going back to that word. You don't find that in people at her stature. Mike, you dealt with her with the press for years. You wrote about it this week.
The coaches, all the coaches, I know as the local people that cover the team, sometimes we feel slighted because the coach doesn't have time for us. But if ESPN comes to town, well, all of a sudden they got all day. Well, Pat treated everybody like that. If you were from ESPN, if you were from the Daily Beacon, the campus newspaper, Maryville Times, Morristown Citizen, whatever, she had time for you. And I'll tell one quick story that Mo Patton, who writes for the Tennessean, had an interview set for her. They were going to meet at the Big Orange Caravan in Nashville. Well, she got late. She got there, didn't have time to do it, but she said, look, I've got to go to another dinner. How about you drive me there? So Mo got her in the car, drove her, and he asked questions while he drove. She held the tape recorder, sat in the passenger seat, and answered all the questions. Interview done.
Held the tape recorder for him. And
held the tape recorder for him.
Yes.
Well, mine's kind of transportation related too. You know, one of the things that obviously you had to be impressed about with Pat was she would play anybody, anywhere. And she wins 84% of her games. You know, the West Coast trip one year flew into San Jose and gets there a little bit late, and the bus or the vans weren't available to take the team and the players to the hotel. And one of the student managers I got along with came over to me at the baggage claim and said, hey, Chuck, Pat needs to talk to you. And I go over there and like, well, what's up? I didn't know what was going on then. And she explains, we have a problem here. And I was like, well, thank goodness it's not something I did. But she asked me if I could help get some of the players to the hotel. She asked me if I had the rental car, and I'm like, yeah. So I ended up with Tiffany Woosley, Vonda Ward, and Lisa Harrison, and Pat goes, "Don't screw this up." You talk about pressure. Now it's pressure. And then she goes, "Chuck, I'm counting on you." And thank God we made it.
Do anything?
Well, just to illustrate the way she handled players and how she was the boss, and she would let you know that I remember interviewing her a few years back, and she had a really good score by the name of Shauna Zollman. And so she had decided, Pat did, that she was going to bring Shauna Zollman off the bench. And so during the course of our interview, we just said, "Well, Pat, what did Shauna think about that?" And she said, "I don't know. I didn't ask her." Didn't need her opinion. This is what we're going to do.
Gentlemen, I will see each of you a little later in the show. When we come back, we're going to run through some of the folks that work closely with Pat Summitt, played for Pat Summitt. Then later we've got folks from the men's side who wanted to salute Pat Summitt. Much more to come today. We're blazing through 120 archival photos, lots of stories. Come on back on the Sports Source as we celebrate the life of Pat Summitt.